Tonight, I speak to America's top diplomat at a crucial moment in the U.S. election race. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told me in an exclusive interview he wouldn't rule out sending long-range ballistic missiles to Ukraine to target Russia. And after an Israeli strike hit a humanitarian safe zone in Gaza, he admitted he couldn't be sure there'd ever be a ceasefire deal in the Middle East.
Based on what's on paper, what's already been agreed, that we're close. But does that mean that we'll get there? No, because there remain hard issues, and ultimately, people have to decide. Leaders have to decide.
There's two wars being fought as American voters prepare to choose their next leader. Soon, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris will face off in a primetime debate with the U.S. presidency on the line. We'll report from the U.S. border with Mexico and hear from the migrants desperate to cross before America votes.
It's the only option I have. I have to get in. It would be really terrible if we couldn't.
Tonight, we'll get expert analysis from our team of correspondents from Western Russia to San Francisco. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening and welcome to the programme. I want to talk tonight about American power and, frankly, its limitations. That's because I sat down with arguably the most powerful diplomat in the world today, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He's the man who's most involved in attempts to broker peace in the Middle East and in Europe. And I have to say, I sensed a real sense of frustration from him about the lack of progress in ending the war in Gaza. He told me that the suffering in Gaza is horrific. He spoke of the fierce urgency of now. But he admitted that while he could pressure and reason, there was no guarantee of a ceasefire deal. He had tough words for Iran too. Today, he accused Tehran of delivering short-range missiles to Russia. His only option to condemn them? Sanctions. And of course, he's a diplomat thinking about his legacy, less than 2 months before an election that will determine the leader of the most powerful country on the planet. Tonight, we'll be live in Pennsylvania, ahead of the first debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. We'll get reaction from Russia and Jerusalem too. But let's get started tonight with my exclusive conversation with Antony Blinken. We heard you earlier today talk about Iran shipping ballistic missiles to Russia. You said they're going to be used on Ukrainians in the next few weeks.
That's right.
We're also hearing about economic sanctions being imposed on Iran. I guess it makes me think, are you just kicking the can down the road? What exactly is the Iran strategy? Because it doesn't feel like economic sanctions is going to cut it.
Well, two things. First, let's look at what they're doing, which is providing Russia with ballistic missiles for use in Ukraine. These are missiles that have a relatively short range, but what it means is that the Russians can free up their own longer-range ballistic missiles, which they've been using on near-in targets, to range even more of Ukraine, including all the way west to Lviv, civilian targets of one kind or another, energy infrastructure. So this is a material difference that's not a good one. I think you've seen just in the last few hours, the United States come out, and now just in recent minutes, European partners making it clear that we are taking and will take additional actions against Iran in response to what they're doing. We've been clear with the Iranians as we saw this brewing that this would have consequences if they went ahead and did it. There will be consequences.
And they have done it, though.
They have done it, but the consequences will be there. And this is at a time when we know from the new Iranian president that they desperately need and want some economic relief, that there's a very heavy burden on the country, and that they're looking for that. This is exactly the opposite way to get what they purport to want: better relations with other countries and some relief from the sanctions that have been imposed on them for their conduct.
Secretary, we could see, though, Pokrovsk fall, which would mean effectively Donetsk falls, and that is one of Vladimir Putin's objectives. So I guess taking all that into account, and now the Iranians are sending ballistic missiles, what more are you going to do other than these economic sanctions?
Well, I think if you look at what we've already done and what we're committed to continuing to do, it's been quite extraordinary. And of course, it starts first and foremost with the Ukrainian people. But let's not forget where we were and where we've come. When Russia proceeded with its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, there were predictions that it would march over the entire country, erase it from the map, which was Putin's objective, subsume it into Russia. And of course, that hasn't happened. To the contrary, the Russians were pushed back dramatically, all the way to the east. Now, the costs that have been imposed on Russia are significant, and they've been sustained. More than 50 countries have come together in support of Ukraine. That support remains. We've seen further manifestations of it, including 23 countries that have signed long-term security agreements with Ukraine to make sure that it can build a military that can deter and, if necessary, defend against future aggression.
I guess the Ukrainians are pushing to be able to use long-range missiles deep into Russian territory. Is this something now that President Biden is not going to rule out? Is it on the table?
At every step along the way, over these last several years, we have adjusted and we've adapted, trying to make sure that Ukraine had what it needed, when it needed it, to be effective in repelling the Russian aggression. And you've seen from the different highly sophisticated weapon systems we provided, intelligence sharing, and many other forms of support. We've worked with many other countries to ensure that Ukraine has what it needs. But one of the things that, Yalda, that's so important is it's not simply saying, oh, should they have this weapon system or that weapon system? There are a lot of things that go into it. Do they know how to use it? And some of these sophisticated systems take training, and that's one of the other things we've done. Can they maintain it? Because if you give them something that falls apart in 7 days because it can't be maintained, that doesn't do a lot of it. And then, is it part of a coherent strategy to achieve a very clear objective? All of those things have to go into these decisions, but what I can tell you is we've adapted and adjusted every step along the way. We'll continue to do that.
So not ruling out at this stage?
We never rule out, but when we rule in, we want to make sure it's done in such a way that it can advance what the Ukrainians are trying to achieve.
Secretary Blinken, I want to turn your attention to the war in the Middle East. I was just in Israel. I spent a week in Israel over the last couple of days. I spoke with the security establishment, with the defense establishment. I spoke to politicians, former prime ministers. All of them have said to me, including, I mean, the Prime Minister didn't say this to me, but he has said publicly that he doesn't believe that there is a deal on the table, that there is a zero plan at this stage. That is in sharp contrast to what you're saying.
When we look at where we are with the work that we've done on a ceasefire agreement, along with Qatar and along with Egypt, in terms of what's on paper right now, more than 90% of it has been agreed. Now, people can change their minds, but at this moment, more than 90% of that agreement reached between both sides. Almost by definition, the closer you get to the finish line, the harder it gets, because the toughest things usually remain till the end. A couple of months ago, when President Biden put before the world a framework agreement for a ceasefire, the entire world rallied behind it. Israel endorsed it, and ultimately Hamas came around as well after about 3 weeks. Since then, we've been working to fill in some of the details because it didn't cover everything, and you also have to do a lot of work to make sure that you agree on how it's implemented. Now, the challenge, of course, is with every passing day, there's the risk of an intervening event that sets you back or makes things more difficult. But I'm convinced, based on what's on paper, what's already been agreed, that we're close. But does that mean that we'll get there? No, because there remain hard issues, and ultimately, people have to decide. Leaders have to decide.
But surely the United States can put more pressure on Israel.
It's not a question of pressure. It's a question of what is in the interest of the parties, and do they see that interest, and are they prepared to act on it? It's manifestly in the interest of Israel, the Palestinian people, every country in the region, for there to be a ceasefire. For Israel, not only bringing the hostages home, but also opening up opportunities to diffuse other crises, including in the north with Hezbollah and Lebanon. The opportunity to pursue with Saudi Arabia a normalization of relations. The opportunity to move forward and actually integrating Israel into the region in ways that it sought from the first day of its existence. Those are all possibilities. They're real possibilities. We saw on April 13th when Iran attacked Israel directly, for the first time, countries come together in defense of it. But in order to do that, to move forward, the conflict in Gaza has to be over. And there also has to be a credible pathway to
and we'll get to the
Palestinian state.
humanitarian situation in a moment, but Benjamin Netanyahu has said there's not a deal in the making. Unfortunately, it's not close. And the security establishment I've spoken to said it's close to zero, very broad pessimism at the moment. I spoke to Ehud Olmert last week, and he said to me, you know, I've known President Biden for a long time. I'm a great admirer. He's a friend. But I feel disappointed because he hasn't put the kind of pressure that will make this Prime Minister understand what's at stake and what's, you know, what the risks are. He said, preferably, I'd like him to take him into a room alone with a baseball bat. I mean, how would you respond to that?
Ultimately, in a democratic system, leaders make decisions, and they have to be responsive to their people, and they have to be responsive to the interests of their country. We can't compel anyone to do that. All we can do is point out the clear benefits of doing that. When it comes to Mr. Sinwar, no one can tell you what he's going to do from one day to the next. Anyone who says that they can, I wouldn't listen to. And the fact of the matter is, we've seen additional issues come up on all sides that need to be resolved.
Just today, we saw 40 Palestinians killed in a displacement camp. In July, 57 civilians were killed in Al-Mawasi, which is considered a humanitarian zone. I mean, these, you know, we can dispute the death toll and where these numbers come from, but the fact is a lot of Palestinians are dying.
It's horrific. The suffering of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza is gut-wrenching, and it hits me every day. And I think most of us think of our own children. And it's one of the reasons we've been determined to do everything we can to make sure that they get the assistance they need. Right now, we're in the midst of what seems to be a successful polio vaccination campaign, thankfully. But it's not enough, and every day we're working to do more. The quickest way to make sure that people stop dying and start getting what they need is through a ceasefire. Now, it's also true, and one of my frustrations has been, just as I fully understand the hue and cry from so many parts of the world about Israel needing to do much better by Palestinians who are suffering, if maybe 10% of that time was actually spent demanding that Hamas get out of the way, that it put down its arms, that it stop hiding behind civilians, that it stop using civilian sites to do its operations and planning, that it get out of the schools, get out of the safe areas, that would be helpful too. I've heard virtual silence since October 7th on that. That is not to justify any actions that Israel may have taken, but it is to say there is silence.
Do you think, though, this is a failure on the part of American leadership? And do you worry this is part of your legacy now?
Everything we're doing around the world, because of the unique role that the United States plays, is something that gets factored into how people think about the United States. And I won't talk about individuals. And so whether it's rallying 50 countries in support of Ukraine and its defense and preventing it from being erased from the map, whether it's the massive effort we made that's now forgotten, I think, for all of us, on COVID, and getting free vaccines, effective vaccines, safe vaccines to countries and millions of people around the world. Whether it's the fact that we're the #1 provider of food aid and food security to countries who desperately need it, and continue to do that.
But an American can get killed in the West Bank, and it doesn't feel like America can do anything about it.
Well, we've seen this horrific loss, the killing of a young American Turkish woman. Just today, we got a preliminary investigation that was provided to us, and the actions that were taken are totally unacceptable. I think it goes to, among other things, the rules of engagement that Israel has.
What will you do about it?
We will, first of all, make sure that we have fully understood the facts, and we'll draw conclusions from that, and there'll be consequences to follow from those conclusions.
Can I ask what consequences?
Well, look, let me give you some examples, not specific to this instance. We have been and we remain deeply concerned about settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. We've taken action in recent months against those who've been responsible for that violence, individuals, organizations. That's just one example of actions that we have taken. We continue to review every incident that comes before us, and as necessary, following the law, we'll take action. But I believe the single best way forward, the place that would move us, the thing that would move us the quickest to relief for people who so desperately need it, is through a ceasefire. And keep in mind, a couple of months ago, President Biden put this ceasefire proposal, the framework for the proposal, in front of the entire world. And he laid out much of what was in it. And the entire world rallied behind it.
Do you think that you will reach some kind of agreement before President Biden's term is up?
I believe we need to reach an agreement urgently. And by that I mean not in 2 months, but in days or certainly weeks. The fierce urgency of now is real for every individual who is suffering as a consequence of this conflict. We feel that urgency, and so we have a determination. Now, at the end of the day, people have to make decisions. Leaders have to make decisions. We can't make those decisions for them.
You can pressure them, though.
You can pressure, you can reason, you can do all sorts of things, but you can't, fundamentally, you can't make the decision. They have to make it, and we're looking to them to do exactly that.
That was my exclusive interview there with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And as you could hear there, a lot to unpack, and we'll be doing that this evening on the programme. In a moment, we'll hear from Alistair Bunkle, who joins us from Jerusalem. But first, let's go to our Ivor Bennett, who joins me now live from Western Russia. And Ivor, you heard there the lines coming out from Ukraine. The Secretary of State, as well as the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, are on their way to Poland, and then they're going to head to Kyiv. That question around Iran shipping those ballistic missiles, and then Blinken talking about long-range missiles potentially, being used within Russia. I mean, we are seeing a change of tone now.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is the closest indication yet from the US that they are actively thinking about giving Ukraine this permission to use their weapons to strike deeper inside Russia. It's what Kyiv sees as a game changer, really. Sees as a game changer because it's something President Zelensky has been lobbying Western governments for months now, because without it, they say Ukraine can't strike the launchers that send Russian rockets into Ukraine. They can't strike the warehouses that store those rockets, and ultimately they feel they can't win the war without this ability to strike deep inside Russia. The best Kyiv has so far at the moment in terms of long-range capability is drones, which they've been using with increasing frequency recently. Just last night, for example, Moscow experienced the biggest drone attack of the war so far. Several residential buildings were hit. A woman was killed. It's the first time a civilian has been killed in the Moscow region as a result of a Ukrainian drone attack. But as effective as that strategy is in terms of taking the war closer to home for Russians and weakening morale and raising anxiety levels, it doesn't change anything on the battlefield. It doesn't stop Russian missiles from falling on Ukraine, which is why Ukraine is so keen for the US to give it this permission to strike deeper inside Russia. And I think that claim that Russia could be using Iranian missiles within weeks on the battlefield will only add to the pressure that Washington is under from Kyiv to give it that permission.
Yeah, indeed, very much so. I guess the next question then is, how is Russia likely to react and respond to this?
Yeah, that's the big question. And the problem is no one really knows the answer. And that's what I think has held back the West from giving this permission before now. We have approached the Kremlin tonight for reaction to Antony Blinken's comments. No reply so far, but it's not a subject they've been shy in talking about in the past. Think back to May when Britain and then Foreign Secretary David Cameron gave Ukraine that first permission to use British-supplied weapons inside Russia. It sparked a furious response, lots of nuclear-related threats to send weapons to other countries to strike Western targets. It marked a real shift in tone, as if Russia felt that a line had been crossed. If they relax that policy even further, well, the risk of retaliation certainly increases. The risk of direct confrontation between Russia and NATO also increases, and it really feels like we're entering a critical phase of the war now.
Yeah, very much so. Ivor, thank you so much for all of your reporting there. Well, as you heard, the Secretary of State told me the suffering in Gaza is horrific. Our interview took place after at least 19 people were killed in an overnight Israeli airstrike in a designated humanitarian zone in the south of the Strip, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle can tell us more.
The airstrikes hit an Israeli-designated humanitarian zone in the middle of the night, right in the centre of tents where families were sleeping. Israel said it used precise munitions in the strike, but the craters from the explosions were deep and wide. Shrapnel cut through the canvas tents and the blast waves flattened an area of the camp. Palestinians dug through the sand, searching for bodies.
We weren't warned, we weren't told to evacuate, nor were we told whether it was a safe place or a battlefield. We were told nothing.
Israel said it killed 3 Hamas commanders who are hiding in the humanitarian zone, and they conducted hours of surveillance before ordering the strike. Hamas claims that none of its fighters were there. At one of the nearby hospitals, children were among the dead.
We were sleeping. Suddenly, it was like a tornado, a pile of stones, smoke, fire, the trees were burning. My daughter on one side. My youngest daughter was under the rubble. The other one was martyred, and I got injured.
This is a baby. She doesn't carry RPGs or Kalashnikovs. This is Israel's policy to kill children.
There are hundreds of thousands of Gazans sheltering in Al-Mawasi. It is supposed to be one of the few places that they are safe. But Israel has repeatedly hit the camp over recent months. The IDF disputes the number of dead, but doesn't deny carrying out the strikes.
And Ali joins us live now from Jerusalem. Ali, you and I were together in Israel last week, where there was a lot of discussion around a ceasefire or a lack of a ceasefire. And we saw Netanyahu come out twice, give a press conference and talk about the fact that there really isn't a ceasefire on the table. That is something that I pushed Antony Blinken on. Interestingly, on the one hand, he did express frustration. On the other hand, it did feel quite pessimistic. I mean, he said we're 90% there. It's just that last 10% is the most difficult. But, you know, we can't guarantee that there could be a ceasefire.
America has remained stubbornly positive throughout many rounds of ceasefire talks, and its critics would say that it's positive and ignoring the realities on the ground. I thought it was interesting that Antony Blinken acknowledged, or seemed to acknowledge, that both sides at times have perhaps added conditions to the deal, because certainly that has been an accusation thrown at both sides. There's been a lot of criticism, well documented, aimed at Benjamin Netanyahu and whether or not he is reluctant to do a deal for various personal political reasons, but also perhaps security reasons for the Israelis going forward. I think we should also ask ourselves the question as to whether Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, really wants to do a deal. We're almost a year now into this war. He is still alive to the best of people's knowledge, and he is hoping that the likes of Hezbollah and Iran eventually join the fight. They haven't done so, not in a meaningful way so far. And so you do have to ask yourself, you know, why would Sinwar want to do a deal now? And as hinted by Antony Blinken, that is perhaps one of the sticking points. I think America is into its last days of a potential deal at the moment, perhaps not for a deal in the long term, but certainly in the time that the Biden administration has left. And if Antony Blinken was sounding pessimistic, it's perhaps because he is now being realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Ali, thank you so much for all of that. And, of course, Ivor with us as well. Well, let's bring in analysis now from our International Affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who joins me here. Dom, I spent about 15 minutes or so with the Secretary of State, and we mostly focused on these two wars. Iran linking these two wars, actually, because they're supplying weapons to both the Russian side as well as Hamas and Hezbollah. It was interesting, though, getting this sense of frustration from him, almost like, well, you know, we're helpless in this situation. We can only take them so far in terms of the war that Israel is fighting against Hamas.
Yeah, and I think the common theme in both dealing with both the Middle East and with Ukraine is this sort of sense of timidity. This is not the kind of assertive, bold US diplomacy of old or even of a year or so ago. This is a Secretary of State who does seem to be frustrated and is holding himself back, arguably, in some ways. I mean, on Iran, it's not just America, but also the other nations imposing these sanctions. They're pretty limited. You know, his head of the CIA over the weekend said if Iran sends ballistic missiles, that will be a dramatic escalation. But the response to it is anything but dramatic. They've sanctioned a few organisations. 3 Iranian officials won't be able to travel to the West, probably don't want to travel to the West. Their assets in the West have been frozen. They probably don't have assets in the West. And they've sanctioned 5 ships. I mean, Russia has, you know, fleets of ships that can take their place. So that's pretty limited. On long-range missiles, there was a hint to you, but also in the press conference I went to earlier, that they are talking to the Ukrainians, and they will continue to do that in their meetings in Kyiv this week, about what the Ukrainians want, which is to be able to use these long-range missiles to do what they're designed to do, which is to fire long-range targets to hit the source of these glide bombs and other munitions that the Russians have been sending into Ukrainian cities with such devastation. But they're still holding back on giving them their ability to do that. And on the Middle East, this very strange sort of hands-off comment he made to you when he said, in the democratic system, leaders make decisions. They have to be responsive to their people. They have to be responsive to the interests of their country. We can't compel anyone to do that. It's almost like he's operating in a vacuum there. You know, he knows perfectly well, the Israelis watching this know perfectly well, that even the threat of Joe Biden reprimanding or rebuking or pointing the finger of blame at the Israeli Prime Minister, as privately Western diplomats are doing at the moment, because these negotiations are stalling, not just because of Netanyahu, but also Hamas dragging their feet. But if the American president does say Netanyahu should do more, that could shift things dramatically in a certain direction. They're not prepared to do that either. Now, it has to be said, you know, this has been a risk-averse administration, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. There has been a real fear, as we heard there from Ivor, about the risk of escalation. But obviously, we're 2 months away from an American election. The last thing that Joe Biden needs now is an escalation in the war in Ukraine or a confrontation with the Prime Minister in Israel. And he knows that, his Secretary of State knows that, but also Netanyahu knows that, Hamas know that, and also in Russia, Putin knows that. And therefore, of course, in the last 2 months of this administration, US diplomacy is not as potent as it could be. And that, I think, partly explains what we've seen in terms of Blinken's performance today, and I think we'll see in the weeks and months to come until the election happens.
Yeah, indeed. And foreign policy, no doubt, will be discussed in tonight's debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Dom, thanks so much for all of your analysis there. Well, stay with us on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Lots coming up after the break. We'll cross live to Philadelphia, where both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are preparing to face off in the first televised debate of this year's presidential election.
We're going to evict crazy Kamala.
Donald Trump is an unserious man.
The most incompetent and far-left vice president in American history.
The American people deserve better.
She breaks everything that she touches.
Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes.
Kamala, who's a Marxist.
Imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, you know, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry. Legal abortion. It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
They're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life?
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first. Welcome back. Well, as you can see there on your screen, the countdown is well and truly underway. In just over 1 month and 24 days, millions of Americans will take to the polls in what's set to be a blockbuster US presidential election. Tonight's TV debate, the first between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, will have a huge impact on how people decide to cast their vote. In a moment, we'll head to the venue for tonight's showdown. But first, our US correspondent Mark Stone reports from Pennsylvania.
Face-to-face, historic.
There is an only in America vibe around all this.
And tonight, Rachel.
Anticipation, energy, jeopardy. The circus has rolled into Philadelphia for the mother of all presidential debates.
The candidates will meet face-to-face for the first time.
And it is certainly the case that with the polls so tight and the options so stark, there is a lot riding on the two candidates who will stand here tonight.
How are you feeling?
Kamala Harris has been prepping on the road between campaign rallies. Donald Trump cut this weekend campaigning short for an extensive prep session at his Florida resort, and the rally routine hints at his pitch.
Stupid, stupid people. And we found that out at the debate with Joe. How did that work out?
Of course, we all remember how it worked out. It was the beginning of the end for President Biden, a performance which precipitated Harris's unchallenged rise.
That someone with the temperament
Trump has been here before, many times. Unpredictable, blunt.
Because you'd be in jail.
On brand. Harris has had far less of this, but it is perhaps her poise.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking.
And prosecutorial background that could knock Trump off his stride. But it's not really here in democratic Philadelphia that all this matters. It is instead in the harder to reach, harder to win rural parts of tight states like this.
I'm probably edging towards Trump, just because I've grown up in a rural area and his beliefs more align with my beliefs, I would say.
In small towns like Oxford, nods to the key election issues are everywhere. Just a few votes one way or the other in places like this could swing the nation left or right.
I know if Kamala gets in, it'll be the same chaos that's been going on for the past 3.5 years.
So has she got any opportunity to change your mind? I mean, could she impress you?
Pretty much made up, but I'm not going to say no.
What does she need to do to make you convinced that she can run the country?
Well, she needs to speak up on what this country needs. And now, when I watched Trump the other night, he shot everybody down and didn't seem like he wanted to do anything for the country.
And so we know just how consequential these debates can be, and in just a few hours this spin room will be full, and with surrogates from both sides trying to insist their candidate was the winner. Trump will frame Harris as continuity Biden, not the change that the country seems to want. He will emphasize her flip-flops. She was certainly once far more to the left than she is pitching herself now. He'll need to hold his temper too, as she frames him as the past, the danger, not the future she thinks she can offer. She will need poise and she will need policy if she's to counter the combatant we all know. This race to the presidency will pass through a gauntlet tonight.
And that was Mark Stone's report there. I'm joined by our US correspondents, James Matthews, Martha Kellner, and of course, Mark is with us from the debate venue in Philadelphia. And Mark, first of all, over to you, because of course, you just talked about how consequential these debates are. You know, you nodded to what happened last time when there was a debate like this. The candidate was dropped and changed. Both candidates have been locked away, essentially, preparing for this big moment.
They have indeed. I mean, you only have to go back a few weeks and remember that debate between Trump and Biden to see how consequential that was. It upturned this election, and maybe it could be upturned again tonight, depending on how the candidates are going. I mentioned the spin room, the spinning. It's ongoing already. You can see here some of the surrogates who are here in Philadelphia already doing their work, trying to spin things one way or the other. Anthony Scaramucci has been here, Olivia Troy as well, two Republicans who once worked for Donald Trump, who now say that he is a threat to the nation, a threat to the world. Remarkable stuff, really. It is absolutely the case, Yalda, that this is a very, very important night for both candidates. 50 million people will watch this, certainly watch the last debate, as many expected to watch this one tonight. And of course, the spinning will take place here. The journalists are here. The surrogates from both sides will come to this room tonight. Some suggestion maybe even Donald Trump himself will be here tonight to do some spinning after the debate. It is an absolutely crucial night. Trump has a lot of experience of these debates, more experience than any other presidential candidate in history. Kamala Harris, she has a little less. James.
I'll be watching the debate here in Kamala Harris's home state of California on what is undoubtedly the toughest night of her political career so far. As Mark was saying, Donald Trump is a veteran of these events. He's taken part in 7 presidential head-to-heads. It's the first for Kamala Harris, and it becomes amid this battle, really, that she's fighting to define herself to portions of this electorate. There are significant numbers of voters in those 7 key swing states who are yet to make up their mind. She needs to tell them who she is and what she stands for. There needs to be a balance of personality and policy too. One area where she can really score points is on abortion. I would be amazed if there isn't a question in the debate on abortion. She and Donald Trump know that that is one of his biggest political vulnerabilities, and she needs to try and exploit that. One of her biggest political vulnerabilities is ties to some of the more unpopular aspects of the Biden administration. She can't disavow the past 4 years that she's had as vice president, but she needs to be careful not to be dragged down by Donald Trump. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of California, the highest ranking legal presence in this state. She knows how to prosecute prosecute a case when it's scripted. What she has shown in the past is she can be tripped up by some unscripted moments, some off-the-cuff remarks. So there are potential pitfalls for Kamala Harris, but plenty of opportunities too. James.
Thanks very much indeed, Martha. Yeah, I think in terms of Donald Trump, what he will want to do tonight, above all else, is keep his cool. He is a man who can be visibly agitated, vent his frustrations and anger, and we have seen that in the past. Remember that first Joe Biden debate in 2020, which gave us the viral Biden moment. Will you shut up, man? That was a night on which Donald Trump was frustrated, kept interrupting, and he lost on that night, and he suffered for it in the polls. He is a man who has learned his lesson. We've seen that in performances subsequently. He's experienced in these surroundings. He's going into his 7th presidential debate, Kamala Harris going into her 1st. His advisors have told him to keep it political, not personal. Remember that Donald Trump has a history of insulting women, Kamala Harris among them. He also has that conviction in a civil court for sexual abuse. Gender will play into the stage dynamics tonight, so any insulting of his female opponent won't necessarily play well for a man of his background in particular, and it won't play well probably with the female vote, which he needs on his side. Donald Trump is said to be in good spirits. One thing he won't like, Yalda, is the fact that the podiums are going to be different in terms of height. Because Harris is shorter, she'll get the shorter podium. Trump had already complained about that, recognising the advantage that would give him, towering over 5'4" Kamala Harris.
Yeah, indeed. So many of those optics being looked at so closely. James, Martha and Mark, thank you all so much. And of course, you will be joining Mark Austin and I this evening as we continue our coverage of that debate from midnight this evening. Now, I want to focus on one of the key issues in the US election. That is, of course, immigration. Some will be thinking of Donald Trump's wall, others Kamala Harris's track record on the issue as vice president. Either way, who wins the race to the White House could have drastic consequences for America's border policy. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has been hearing from those trying to cross the border before the polls close. He sent this report from the US-Mexico border.
They've been queuing from dawn in what is arguably one, if not the most important day of their lives. They're migrants heading for the United States. They're here on the Texas border for their entry interview to America. After months, even years on the road, this is it, their final chance. They may be unaware of it, but these immigrants are at the centre of one of the most hotly debated, even divisive issues of this US presidential election. And on this issue, Trump beats Harris in the polls, and it will be a critical issue in the TV debate. The walkway crosses the Rio Grande, the border between the two countries. They're now a few steps away from America. Many can't believe it. US border guards check their papers, and they are through. Those children, these families, are about to start a new life. People from Venezuela, Haiti, Nicaragua and Cuba make up the vast majority of those who are taking part in what is basically a legal movement across the border. That's the United States just there. Many have been travelling for months and months to get here. This is their moment. They're going to come for an appointment, but once you've got this far, short of a massive change in your circumstances, you will go through to the United States. There's little sign of Donald Trump's border wall here, but he'd doubtless approve of the razor wire fortifications between Mexico's Matamoros City and Brownsville in Texas. Experts here say that there's no doubt who those seeking asylum are backing in this election and this debate. You know, there are migrants here. Are all of them thinking all the time there's an election coming and we need to get across the border as soon as possible?
Yeah, I think it's the same situation when Biden won the elections. All the migrant people in the borders, especially in this Tamaulipas-Texas border, they were waiting for a new hope, open doors in the borders. That maybe will be the same situation if Harris wins the presidential United States.
And they're all watching, yeah? They're all watching and waiting and listening.
Yeah, of course, yeah, sure.
In shelters and hostels across Mexico, migrant families simply have to wait for their border appointment. It's like a lottery, and it can take a long time for their number to come up. They are stuck here. Few go outside. They're easy prey for cartel gangs who kidnap and hold them for ransom. Marlene Cabrera and her family are from Honduras. They've been waiting for an appointment for 7 months. The only male amongst them is the baby. Any tightening of the immigration rules, as threatened by Donald Trump, would be for them a disaster.
He estado tanto tiempo aquí y no poder entrar es
I've been here so long, and not being able to get in would be hard, because it's the only option I have. I have to get in. It would be really terrible if we couldn't. And I don't just speak for myself, I speak for everyone here.
Day in, day out, in any weather, the migrants line up for their appointment here. The presidential debate and the election in the United States is never far from their minds. For those who follow them, what happens in a country just a few meters away will change their lives forever. It could be good, or it could be bad.
And Stuart, of course, joins us tonight from the US-Mexico border. Stuart, thank you so much for your reporting. It just shows the desperation of these people, but also quite significant, that question you asked one of them where you said, who would you like to see win? And they sort of indicated that Biden and then obviously Harris now. I mean, that's quite damaging for her, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, Harris obviously is going to be supported by all the migrants, because there is this expectation that Democrats are going to be easier for migrants when it comes to crossing that border. But she does have a problem, because there were unprecedented numbers throughout the Biden administration era that have crossed that border illegally. And of course, you can't really say that you're a change candidate when you're the vice president. She will be attacked by Trump on this, but what she's saying is there's already a bipartisan agreement in place, and that was kiboshed by Trump's supporters. She's leaning on that, saying there is going to be a complete overhaul. It has been agreed between the parties, and therefore that will be the future. Trump, of course, scores very, very highly in the polls on this issue, and I think in this debate, but also if he was to win the election, he will go the full Donald on this. There'll be talks about the wall being extended, the army will be used to kick people out of the United States if they're illegals. So he knows it's a very strong position that he has on this, and he has a lot of support in the country. So I'm sure in this debate he's going to go after Harris specifically on this subject.
Stuart, well, we'll obviously be watching and reporting very closely. Thank you so much for now. Well, as we all know, a lot of US politics is about simple maths and maybe a bit of geography. The election will likely be decided by the result of a handful of key states where neither candidate appear to have a majority. And as November looms, they will be crucial to understanding whether Donald Trump or Kamala Harris's message is convincing the undecided. Sky's US election data analyst Louis Goodall explains.
There are 7 key states where this election is going to be decided. What does the latest data tell us about how each candidate is doing in each of these 7 states? Well, you can see here, full 7 swing states here: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, all in very different parts of the United States. And in each of them, if you're in the Harris campaign, you're looking at that. This is their polling lead average in each of these states. You're looking at that and thinking, well, that ain't bad. We are in front. Wisconsin, we're in front quite a lot. But look at the margins in all of these other states. Arizona, 0.3%. Georgia, 0.5%. Both states that Biden won back in 2020. North Carolina, Trump won it in 2020, but ahead only by 0.3%. And even in Michigan, Nevada, and the key state, we'll talk about it more in a minute, of Pennsylvania, all states won by Joe Biden back in 2020. We are talking about a really small poll lead. And bear in mind as well, all of these polls come with a caveat, the margin of error, i.e. they may be out by between 2 and 3%. So when you put that in mind and all of the other frailties we know about state polling, then we can see what this race really is a dead heat. If you're in a Harris campaign, you're not looking at that and thinking we are home and dry by any stretch of the imagination at all. So how does that translate into the actual electoral map. We know 270 electoral college votes you need to win. Let's have a look at these grey states here. Those are exactly the states that we were just talking about, the key swing states. And basically, we need to fill in that map in order to see who might get to 270. So let's, for the sake of argument, say that some of those states that Biden won in 2020 for the first time, like Georgia and Arizona, that Trump might be able to win those back. And let's say, for the sake of argument as well, he wins Nevada and he wins North Carolina as well, which he won back in 2020. And that Harris wins Wisconsin, where she's far ahead, and she manages to hang on in Michigan as well. Those two states tend to vote together. We can see where we end up. And basically, this presidential election ends up in the northeastern state of Pennsylvania with its 19 electoral college votes, because both candidates need it to win. If we give it to Kamala Harris, then she's on 270. If we give it to Donald Trump, he's on 287. For Kamala Harris in particular, it is really hard to make the electoral map add up without Pennsylvania. If we give that to Donald Trump and see, well, what would Harris have to do then? Well, she'd have to really sweep the board in the other states. So she'd have to win in Nevada, and she'd have to win in Arizona, and then she would have to win in either Georgia, which Biden only won by an absolute hair's breadth back in 2020, in which Democrats don't normally win in these days, or in North Carolina. So she would have to sweep the board in the other swing states if she loses in Pennsylvania. That is why both Democratic and Republican strategists all think that the road to this election, it's not just a 270, but it is through the northeastern state of Pennsylvania.
Lewis Goodall there. And Lewis, of course, will be joining Mark Austin and I on election night in November. Which is November 5th.
8 weeks away.
Yeah, that's right. 1 month and 24 days away, Mark. Yeah. But we're going to be doing the election
We have another
debates
night together first, don't we?
Yeah,
tonight.
I mean, I guess, you know, Lewis was pointing out there that ultimately this is a numbers game. But the focus tonight really is going to be about, on one level, introducing Kamala Harris to the American people.
Exactly. And it really depends, I guess, on who is allowed to define Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, whether it is Kamala Harris herself or Donald Trump gets to define what she stands for, or at least what he thinks she stands for. That could be absolutely crucial. But it's so close, as Lewis Goodall was showing there. I mean, really, really tight. And the jeopardy tonight for both these candidates is extraordinary. The dynamic is fascinating, don't you think? Donald Trump up against a female nominee, a female candidate, as he was in 2016. We know what happened then. He couldn't help himself. He always has this habit of trying to belittle women. Could that backfire tonight? And the other dynamic, I think, Yalda, that's really interesting is the prosecutor and felon dynamic. And if Kamala Harris, you know, is able to turn a debate into effectively a trial, a prosecution of Trump, then that could be very interesting.
Very much so. And actually, in 2020, when she ran and lost to Biden when it came to, you know, being the nominee for the Democratic Party, she used this line, didn't she? You know, she talked about the fact that she's the prosecutor that could take on Donald Trump. And we're seeing her use that same sort of line in the rallies and speeches that she's given to date. We don't know if there'll be another potential debate. So this could be it. And this could determine a lot. I mean, frankly, we saw how consequential the last debate was. It knocked the other guy out. I mean, you know, he went effectively from people questioning and uncertain about which way they would go to essentially him being out, Kamala Harris within weeks taking over from him. I mean, I don't, obviously,
well,
you know.
I mean, one question now for Kamala Harris, which she'll want to push, is that Donald Trump is now the old guy. Donald Trump is now the guy she will try and portray, I'm sure, as same old, not really across the detail. And if she can do that, that would be successful. I mean, Donald Trump will obviously want it the other way. He will say, I'm the experienced guy. And, you know, he will be the former president in control. Now, if he manages to do that, then that's good for him. But I think, you know, if Kamala Harris can push the fact that Joe Biden's gone, now Donald Trump is the would be the oldest president in American history.
Indeed. Yes, exactly that. And actually, you know, what Trump is going to try and do is focus on the fact that he wants to turn Kamala Harris as the continuity president. This is more of the same. This is more of the Biden, presidency. This is all of the failings that he sees in the Biden administration. She is very much part of that circle and part of that policy, whereas he wants to almost sell himself as the change candidate that he sold himself in 2016 as.
So Kamala Harris has somehow then to untether herself from the Biden presidency, from those 4 years, because how can you be a change candidate when people will say, well, change from what, the last 4 years? So it's very difficult for Kamala Harris to portray herself as a genuine change candidate, as it is actually for Donald Trump, because we know what Donald Trump is like. And it's going to be another 4 years, pretty similar, I guess, to the first 4 years.
Yeah, very much so. We'll have to see how this evening pans out. You and I will be back on air for the next few hours. Coffee, lots of coffee and sweets. We'll be on air till about 5 o'clock in the morning UK time, from midnight, for all of our special coverage this evening. Do stay with us. Lots coming up, but the news at 10 is in the next few minutes. Good night.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.